The first time I heard the name Black Wolf, I was standing over a map of the Ashen Reach with 3 of my border commanders, and none of them would meet my eyes. That was the tell. When my commanders stopped meeting my eyes, it meant the news was worse than the dispatch had described. It was worse. 14 settlements in 11 months. Not raised, not the work of a raiding band looking for grain and silver. Methodical. The livestock driven off but not slaughtered. The buildings burned only after they were emptied. No bodies left behind except the men who had drawn weapons, and even those deaths were quick, not savage. Someone was clearing the borderlands. Someone who knew exactly how to do it without leaving anything behind that could be tracked. "He wears black armor," my commander Aldrich said, and his voice was careful in the way voices get when a man is leaving something out. "Full helm, no house sigil." "How many riders?" "He rides alone." I looked up from the map then. A single night, 14 settlements, 14 without a single survivor who could give me a face. "There are survivors," I said. "Yes, my king, they are unhurt. He takes nothing from them personally, no women taken, no children harmed, no one beaten for sport. He simply tells them to leave and then burns the structure behind them. And they leave." "He is very convincing," Aldrich said, which was the politest way a soldier could say. "The man is terrifying and no one with good sense argues with him." I looked back at the map. 14 settlements formed a crescent along the southwestern border of Valdenmoor, each one a half-day's ride from the last. Whoever he was not raiding. He was drawing a line, pulling back the edge of my kingdom, settlement by settlement, slow enough that no single loss felt like a war. I had been patient for 11 months because I could not afford a war with an enemy I could not identify. My pack needed the harvest. My border holds needed their timber contracts. 3 of my northern vassals were already testing their oaths, and an alpha king who chased phantoms in the Ashen Reach was an alpha king who looked like he was losing his grip. But 14 had become, by the time Aldrich finished his report, 15, the hamlet of Brethwick, the largest of the border settlements, a community of 400 souls with a mill and a healer's post that served 6 surrounding villages. "The healer," I said, "was she evacuated with the rest?" A pause. "There was a healer, yes. She is an unusual case, my king. The Black Wolf encountered her during the raid on Brethwick. He found her in the middle of setting a child's broken arm. He waited while she finished. Then he told her to take the child and go." I set down the compass I had been holding. "He waited." "Yes, and according to 3 separate witnesses, this is the 3rd settlement she has been present for. He has encountered her before. In Castle's Ford, 7 months ago, she was found tending a fever patient in the back room of the miller's house." He looked at her for what witnesses describe as a very long moment, and then left the building without touching it. "He burned every other building in Castle's Ford," I said. "Yes. And in Thornfield." "She was there in Thornfield as well. He found her in the road. He stopped his horse. He sat there for witnesses say almost 2 full minutes. Then he rode around her." I rolled up the map. "Bring her to Valdenmoor Hold," I said. "Gently. She is not a prisoner. Tell her I am offering her my protection while I resolve the situation on the border. Tell her she may bring her medicines, her instruments, whatever she needs, but bring her." Aldrich hesitated. "My king, she may refuse. She is apparently quite." "Gently, Aldrich," I said, "but bring her." She refused twice. I know this because Aldrich sent me increasingly pained dispatches over the following 4 days in which he described, with the helpless precision of a man being slowly defeated by a small woman in a gray cloak, how the healer Marin of Thornfield felt that the border settlements needed her more than I did, that a king with 1,200 wolves in his pack was unlikely to be suffering from any shortage of medical attention, and that she had 17 patients currently under her care who were not going to tend themselves. On the third request, I sent Aldrich a direct order and a covered wagon with a proper bed in it. She arrived at Valdenmore Hold on a gray afternoon in the first week of winter, stepping out of the wagon with the expression of a woman who had decided some fights were not worth having while reserving the right to be thoroughly unimpressed. She was not what I had expected. I had constructed in my mind a particular sort of woman who would stand in a burning road and decline to move for a mounted knight in black armor, someone severe, perhaps, or very old, or very afraid and therefore frozen. Marin was none of these things. She was perhaps 30, with the kind of steadiness that comes not from an absence of fear but from a long and intimate acquaintance with it. Her hands, I noticed immediately, were healer's hands, clean, precise, slightly roughened at the knuckles from cold water and hard work. She looked at me the way she might have looked at a particularly large horse. She had not yet decided whether to trust. "You are the Alpha King," she said. It was not a question and not quite a greeting. "I am. Your dispatches said I would be safer here. I want to understand what that means, because I have been on the border for 6 years, and I have watched the Black Wolf empty 4 settlements without harming a single civilian. So you will have to explain to me what, specifically, you are protecting me from." My wolf, who had been quiet for 2 years, quietly hunting, quietly grieving, quietly carrying the weight of 15 ruined settlements and 20 years of a loss I still could not put down, went utterly, completely still. Not the stillness of a predator sighting prey. Something else. Something I had no good word for, like a room I had been searching in the dark and someone had just lit a lamp. I said, "Come inside, Marin of Thornfield. I will explain everything I know. It is, I should warn you, not as much as I would like." She considered this for a moment, then walked past me into my hold. My wolf stayed still, and paying attention to every sound her boots made on the stone. The thing about a fated bond is that it does not announce itself as something gentle. I had not expected gentleness. I'm a king who has ruled since he was 19, who has seen 2 border wars and 1 succession crisis, and the quiet destruction of his southwestern edge. And I had given up on the idea of a mate with the pragmatic resignation of a man who has too much to do to grieve properly. What I had not expected was this, that the bond would feel, first and most powerfully, like recognition. Not of her face, I had never seen her before, not of her voice, but of something underneath the surface of things, some frequency she carried that my wolf had apparently been listening for without telling me. Sitting across from her in my study while she drank the tea my housekeeper had pressed on her, and I walked her through everything I knew about the Black Wolf. The crescent of evacuated settlements, the precision of it, the single rider, the impossible discipline of a campaign that had run for nearly a year without a single mistake. I kept losing my place. Not because she was distracting, exactly. Because my wolf kept pulling my attention toward her the way a compass needle pulls toward north, and I had spent enough years ignoring discomfort that I could do it, but it costs something. "You think he is building towards something," she said. She had her hands wrapped around the cup and she was looking at the map I had unrolled on the desk between us. "I think he is drawing a new border," I said. "I think someone has decided where Valdenmore ends and has hired this knight to make it true on the ground. What I cannot determine is who, or why now, or why he is doing it 1 settlement at a time instead of simply attacking the border holds directly." "Because he doesn't want a war," she said. I looked at her. "He empties the buildings before he burns them," she said. "He waited while I set Davin's arm. He rode around me in Thornfield. Whatever he is doing, he is trying to do it with as few deaths as possible." She paused, and something moved in her expression that she did not try to hide. "He is not a cruel man. I don't know what he is, but he is not cruel." "You sound certain of that." "I have been working in those settlements for 6 years, she said quietly. "I know what cruel men do to the people they pass through." I had no answer for that. I folded the map. You will stay here until I have resolved this, I said. Your patience. I will send 2 of my healers to the border settlements. They will provide the same care you were providing. You have my word. She looked at me for a moment, and there was something measuring in it, something that was evaluating not my rank or my power but some other quality she had learned, in 6 years of border work, to look for in the people who told her things would be all right. Your word, she repeated. My word. She set down the cup. Then I will stay, she said, for now. She did not say it like a concession. She said it like a decision she had made herself, which was, I was beginning to understand, the only way Marin of Thornfield made anything. That night, my wolf lay down at the threshold of the guest corridor where she was sleeping, and would not be moved. I stood there in the dark for a long time, looking at him, and then I went to bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about a compass needle and about the color of a room with a lamp lit in it. I need to tell you about Wren. My brother was 4 years younger than me, which made him 10 years old the winter the Byzantine raiders came through Valdenmore's southern pass. I was 14 and already in training, and already my father had decided, large enough to be useful, which meant I was in the training yard when the attack came and not in the house where Wren was. He was there. My father went back for him. My father did not come out. The raiders took 3 things from Valdenmore that winter: 12 horses, 40 silver marks from the border hold treasury, and my brother, who was small and frightened and apparently deemed worth the trouble of carrying. I had been looking for him for 20 years. Not openly, not in a way that could be used against me, not in a way that told my enemies there was a wound they could press on. Quietly, every trade caravan that came through the southern pass I asked. Every mercenary company that came out of the eastern territories I had my men question. Every rumor of a boy taken, a child sold, a prisoner ransomed, I followed it, and every time I followed it, it went cold. 20 years of cold trails. The carved wolf figure that my border scouts recovered from the ashes of a hamlet called Grindwall was not cold. My father had carved those figures. It was not a skill he taught anyone. It was a private habit, something he did in the evenings by firelight, small wolves from scraps of pine, given without ceremony to the children of his pack. I had one. Wren had kept one in his boot the last time I saw him. The figure my scout placed on my desk was carved from pine. The technique was exactly my father's. I would know it in my sleep, in the dark, with my hands and not my eyes, and it had been left in the ashes at Marin's feet. I sat with it for a long time. Then I went to find Marin. She was in the east wing with 3 of my soldiers who had taken injuries in a border skirmish the week before, and she was redressing the worst wound with the particular efficient tenderness of someone who had done this 10,000 times and had never stopped caring about it. She looked up when I appeared in the doorway, read something in my face, and said to the soldier whose shoulder she was rapping, "Hold this." She pressed his hand to the bandage and crossed to me. "What happened?" she said. I held out the figure. She looked at it, then she looked at me. "This was at my feet," she said, "in Grindwall." "Yes." "You know who made it?" "My father," I said, "or someone who learned from him. My brother kept one like it. He was taken from Valdenmore 20 years ago. He was 10 years old." She was quiet for a moment, and I could see her working through it, not slowly, not struggling, just moving through the logic the way she moved through a diagnosis, following the line. "The Black Wolf left this for me," she said. "Or for me, knowing you would bring it. He knew I would end up here. Apparently." She was still looking at the figure. "He stopped for me in Castle's Ford," she said. "He stopped in Thornfield. He waited while I set that child's arm." She paused. "That was not professionalism, was it? He was trying to see if I was all right." I had thought this. I had not been able to say it without what it meant landing on me full weight, so I had not said it. It is possible, I said, that Ren is alive. It is possible that whatever they made of him, something inside him recognized something. A frequency, a scent. I stopped. You are my fated mate, Marin. I did not tell you because I did not want to make you feel you had no choice in being here. But if the bond is real, then Ren could have scented it on you. He would have known you were connected to me. She looked up from the figure. She looked at me for a long, steady moment, and she did not seem frightened or even particularly surprised. She seemed, if anything, like someone who had suspected a diagnosis and was waiting for the confirmation. That is why he wouldn't hurt me, she said. Yes. Because he didn't want to hurt you. The words landed somewhere behind my ribs and stayed there. I believe so, I said. She handed the figure back to me. Then she said, then we need to find a way to get me in front of him, somewhere he can see me where you can also be there, and I need to be able to talk to him. That is not. Calder. It was the first time she had used my name, and it stopped me the way she had probably intended it to. He has been trying to reach you for a year. He cannot simply ride up to your gate and knock, because whatever they've made him into, he probably cannot walk away from his orders that easily. But he has been leaving breadcrumbs, in ash, at my feet. She held my gaze. Let me be the one to answer. My wolf, who had been paying close attention to this entire conversation, leaned into my chest like a warm weight. I thought about 20 years of cold trails. I said, tell me what you need. What followed was 3 weeks of careful planning, and on the side, 3 weeks of learning what it meant to share a space with Marin of Thornfield. She was not comfortable in my hold the way a guest is comfortable. She did not treat it as a place she was waiting to leave, but she also did not treat it as a place she had arrived. She occupied it the way she occupied her border work, practically directly, with her attention on whatever needed doing. She organized my healer's supply stores, which had apparently been in a state that offended her professional sensibilities. She spent 2 evenings teaching a young soldier named Doran how to clean and dress a wound properly, because Doran had confessed to her that he was responsible for redressing his own stitches and was doing it wrong. I found reasons to be in the same rooms. I was not subtle about it. My commanders noticed and said nothing, which was its own form of eloquence. My wolf was less interested in subtlety than I was. He had taken to appearing at her side during the day in a way that I could not explain and did not try to. And she had, without comment or ceremony, simply accepted him as part of her daily company. I watched her put her hand on his gray head one evening in the courtyard and say something quiet to him that I was too far away to hear, and something in my chest performed an action I did not have a word for. On the 4th evening, she found me on the outer wall. You should rest, she said, coming to stand beside me. I rest. You sleep 3 hours and then walk the walls until dawn. I have watched you do it 4 times. You are observant. It is a professional requirement. She leaned against the stone beside me, looking out at the dark pine forest below. Tell me about him. Ren, what was he like? No one had asked me that in 20 years. Everyone around me knew not to ask. I said small. He was always small, even for 10, he never grew the way I did. Our father used to say he had all the patience Calder didn't, which was his polite way of saying I was difficult. I paused. He liked the wolves. The pack wolves, not just the spirit wolves. He used to go into the forest and sit very still until they came to him. He had a particular quality of stillness that I never learned. I always had too much energy, too much noise. He still has it, Marin said. I looked at her. The stillness, she said. In the road at Thornfield, he sat on his horse and he was completely still, and I remember thinking that was strange, for a man in black armor on a mission of destruction. I thought he looked like someone who had been very still for a very long time. She was quiet for a moment. I think he has been still and waiting for 20 years, and he could not find a way to end it until he found me. I did not trust my voice, so I said nothing. After a moment, she put her hand over mine on the wall and left it there, and we stood like that in the dark while the wind came off the forest, and my wolf breathed slow and even beside us. I did not say anything about the bond. I did not say anything about the fated claim, or about the fact that every instinct I possessed was pulling toward her with the quiet insistence of a tide. She knew. I had told her. Whatever she did with it would be her own decision. She did not remove her hand. The plan was simple, and Marin was the first to say that simple plans were the only plans the Ashen Reach could be trusted with. We had identified from the pattern of the evacuations where the Black Wolf was likely to move next, a settlement called Edenmere, the last hamlet in the Crescent, the piece that would complete the line he had been drawing. We would be there before him. I would have a small party, 8 riders, no more positioned in the tree line. Marin would be visible in the settlement itself. "You are not to advance until I call for you," she said. She said it to me specifically, which told me she had understood exactly how this was likely to go. "Marin, if you come out of the trees with 8 armed wolves the moment he appears, he will react as a soldier, not as Ren. You will get a fight, not a reunion." She looked at me steadily. "Give me 2 minutes." 2 minutes, I said. 2 minutes, she paused. "If something goes wrong, you will know. I am not asking you to stay back if something goes wrong." "You will not get 2 minutes, my commander," Aldrich said, not helpfully. "You will get approximately 45 seconds before the king." "Aldrich," I said. "My king." "Thank you." He went attend to the horses. Marin watched him go, then looked back at me. "You'll give me the 2 minutes," she said, and it was not quite a question. "I will give you every second I can," I said. "That is the most honest thing I can tell you." She nodded. It was enough. Edenmere was cold and gray the morning the Black Wolf came, with the kind of winter light that makes everything look like it is made of ash already. The settlement had been evacuated the night before, all but Marin, standing in the road in her gray cloak, her breath visible in the cold air. I was in the trees. 8 riders, very still. My wolf a low shape beside me, 200 yards of open ground between the tree line and the road. I watched him come. He rode alone, as he always did, a tall man on a black horse, armored in black with a full helm, no insignia anywhere on him. He rode like someone who had long since stopped thinking about how to ride, the motion entirely automatic, which was itself a thing that took years to build. He was large. He rode differently from how I remembered Ren moving as a boy, bigger, heavier, weighted with 20 years of whatever they had done to make him this. He came around the bend in the road, and he saw her. He stopped. 50 yards. He sat there on the horse, and the horse was very still, and everything in the scene was very still, and I felt my wolf gather himself against my leg. "Not yet." Marin did not back up. She did not raise her hands, did not make any gesture of surrender or welcome. She simply stood in the road the way she had stood in the road at Thornfield, with the particular quality of presence that was hers, not challenging him, not appeasing him, simply being entirely, quietly herself. After a moment, he dismounted. He walked toward her slowly, one hand loose at his side, the other resting near but not on his sword. A man accustomed to combat who was choosing, deliberately and with visible effort, not to read this as a combat situation. He stopped 10 feet from her. She said something, too quiet for me to hear. He went very still. She said something else, and I saw his right hand, the sword hand, come up partway and then stop. And then she said a word. I knew from 40 feet away in the tree line what word it was, because I had been watching her lips, and because I had taught her the sound of it on the 3rd evening when she asked me how he was called, not the Black Wolf, but his name, the name I had called him. Ren. The Black Wolf stood perfectly still. Then very slowly, his left hand came up to his helm. He took it off. I was already moving. Not 8 riders, just me, alone out of the trees, across the open ground. Because whatever happened next was between him and me and not a military operation. My wolf ran at my side, and I was aware of Aldrich's sharp intake of breath behind me, and then his order holding the others back. And then I was past the edge of the trees and crossing the dead winter grass, and there was no thought in me at all, only the face I had been looking for across 20 years of cold trails. He looked like my father. That was the first thing, the thing that hit before everything else. He had grown into my father's face, the same strong jaw, the same darkness around the eyes, and he was looking at me with an expression that I had no name for because it was made of things that had been happening to a person for 20 years and had no right to be compressed into a single look. Maren stepped aside. She did not go far. She moved perhaps 3 steps to the left, just enough to put herself out of the direct line between us, and she folded her hands in front of her and she waited, with the particular quality of stillness that I now knew she had learned from watching wolves. Ren looked at me. I said his name, just his name, nothing else. He said, I didn't know how to come back. It was not what I had expected to say first. It was not what I had expected him to say first. It was very quiet, and the cold morning took the sound of it and held it. I said, you found a way. He looked at Maren. Something crossed his face that was not quite a smile, but was close enough. She was in the road in Thornfield, he said, and she smelled like. He stopped. He looked back at me. She smelled like home. My wolf sat down on the ground between us and put his gray head down on the winter grass. I crossed the remaining distance. My brother was taller than me, which I had not expected. I had spent 20 years carrying the memory of a small boy, and he had grown into someone larger, someone who had been trained to be formidable, and had used that training for a year to leave breadcrumbs in the ash. I put my hand on the back of his neck the way our father used to, and I felt him go rigid, and then, after a moment, let out a breath that sounded like something he had been holding for a very long time. We stood like that in the cold. What followed was not simple. I will not tell you it was simple. There were questions I could not ask yet, about who had taken him and where he had been and what orders he had been operating under and how much of what he had done in the past year was chosen and how much was something else. Those questions mattered. They mattered for his safety, for the safety of Valdenmoor, for the politics of what came next with whatever power had been directing him. They would take time. They would require care. But those questions could wait. For now, for that morning in Edenmere, we walked back through the cold to where the horses were waiting, and Maren walked beside me, and Ren walked on my other side, and when he shivered the armor was cold, and he was doing something that looked like shock. She pressed a small packet of dried herbs into his hands without a word and told him to hold it and breathe, because the warmth would help. He looked at her with an expression that I suspected was very close to how I looked at her, and said, "You're the king's mate." "I am," she said before I could speak. She said it like a decision she had made herself, which was the only way she made anything. That night in the great hall of Valdenmoor Hold, my pack gathered, not summoned, not commanded, but drawn by the news that spread the way news always spreads through a pack, with the particular electric speed of something that matters to everyone. Ren sat at my right hand and said almost nothing, and ate like a man who had been hungry for years and was not sure he deserved to stop. Aldrich, who was old enough to remember the raid that had taken Ren, sat across from him and kept looking at him with the expression of a soldier, trying very hard not to show what he was feeling. Maren sat at my left. She had changed from her gray cloak into something my housekeeper had provided, a deep blue wool, practical and warm, and she looked, in the candlelight of my hall, entirely at home in a way that I suspected she did not yet feel. She was watching Ren with the calm, attentive look she used on patients she was not sure of yet. I covered her hand with mine on the table. She turned her hand over and held on. The pack was watching. I did not mind them watching. Some things are worth making visible, worth making public, not as a performance but as a truth that deserves to be seen. My wolf, in the space beneath the table, put his gray head on her feet and went to sleep. After the meal, when the hall had quieted and Wren had been shown to a room with a fire in it, and a door he could lock from the inside, because I understood, without asking, that this was something he would need, I walked with Marin out to the eastern courtyard where the cold was clean and the stars were out. She stood beside me for a while without speaking, which was something I had come to understand was not an absence of something but a form of presence. She did not fill silence, she inhabited it. I said, "He found you in the border settlements a year ago." 6 months in, she said, "Castle's Ford." And he knew. I think he knew there was something, she said. Whether he knew exactly what it was, she paused. He was looking for a door that had been locked for 20 years. I think I smelled like the key. "You are the key," I said, "to everything." She looked at me sidelong. "That is a great deal of pressure," she said, and there was a warmth in it, a dryness, the particular humor of a woman who has spent 6 years on a border nobody else wanted to work, and has therefore developed a certain perspective on large claims. "I did not mean it as pressure," I said. "I meant it as the truth. You are why he found his way back. You are why I am standing here with my brother a room away instead of—" I stopped. "I have been searching for him for 20 years. I had made my peace with the idea that I might never stop searching. That is not a small thing." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I know." Simple. Not a comfort, not a dismissal, not a claim to understand everything, just, "I know," the way she said everything that mattered. I said, "I will not pretend I don't know what you are to me. The bond is what it is, and I have no interest in misleading you about it or about what I feel. But I will also not press you for anything. You came here because Aldrich brought you, and you stayed because you chose to, and everything else will be what you choose it to be." She turned to face me. In the starlight she looked like someone who had made a very long journey and had arrived exactly where she intended to, though the destination had not been marked on any map she had been given. "I stayed," she said slowly, "because a man I had never met kept me from being evacuated with everyone else, and I needed to know why." She paused. "And then I stayed because of your wolf. And then I stayed because of your soldiers, who needed a competent healer and had been making do with someone who bandaged like they had never seen a limb before." She paused again. "And then I stayed because of you." I looked at her. "Because of me," I said. "You are a man who spent 20 years looking for his brother quietly," she said, "because you did not want his enemies to know there was a wound they could press on. That is not a small thing either." She held my gaze. "I have spent 6 years learning to recognize the difference between men who are powerful and men who are good. They are not always the same man." I said nothing. "You are both," she said, simply and finally, in the way she said everything that was true. I brought her hand up, and I pressed my mouth to her fingers, and my wolf lifted his head from the courtyard stone where he had settled and regarded us with the satisfied expression of a creature whose opinion has been correct all along. I did not make a formal claim before the assembled pack that night. That would come. There would be a day with ceremony and witnesses, a day when Valdenmore's Luna was named before everyone with the full weight of tradition behind it, and I would want Wren to be standing at my right hand when it happened. But I said quietly in the courtyard, with only the stars and my wolf to hear, "Marin, will you stay?" She looked at me for a long moment. "I have 17 patients," she said. "I will build you a healer's post," I said, "inside the hold, large enough for twice as many. The border settlements still need coverage. I have 2 healers there now, as I promised. I will send more." She considered this. "You will have to stop walking the walls all night," she said. "It is bad for you." "I expect," I said, "that I will have better reasons to stay inside." She made a sound that was almost a laugh, brief, warm, the kind of laugh that happens before a person has decided to let themselves be happy. "Then yes," she said, "I will stay." Ren stayed too. That is the part of this story that the pack was perhaps most uncertain about in those first weeks, how to hold both things at once. The relief of the Alpha King's brother returned, and the knowledge of what he had done to the border settlements, the people displaced, the winter homes lost. I did not dismiss that uncertainty. I sat with my counsel, and I listened to it, and I said, he was taken at 10 years old and spent 20 years being built into a weapon by people who are no longer my problem, because we will be paying them a visit in the spring. The settlements will be rebuilt. The displaced families will be housed and compensated. He will spend the next year helping rebuild what was burned, by his own insistence, which tells you something about who he is underneath what they made of him. The pack, because packs are wise in the way that collectives are when they have good leadership, accepted this and moved on. Marin's healer's post was built by the end of the first month, in the east wing, with a south-facing window and more shelf space than she had asked for, because I had looked at the way she organized things and understood that she would fill it. She did. The border settlements, Brethwick, Castles Ford, Thornfield, Grindwall, all of them were rebuilt by summer. Wren rode the border all spring with timber and labor, and the somewhat terrifying efficiency of a man who knew exactly which structures had been burned and why, and who had apparently spent a year thinking about how he would undo it if he got the chance. I had not known before that year what it felt like to have my whole house in order. I had been a king since 19. I had ruled well enough, my pack was safe, my borders held, my word was trusted. But ruling and living are not the same thing, and I had spent 20 years doing the former and not very much of the latter. I learned the difference that year. Marin taught it to me. Not deliberately. She was not the sort of person who set out to teach anyone anything, believing, as she did, that most people already know what they need to know and require only occasionally someone to hand them the right tool at the right moment. What she did was exist, fully and without apology, in my hold and in my life and in the East Wing healer's post that was never quite quiet enough for my tastes. And gradually, I understood that a house with that kind of noise in it was a house with something alive inside it. My wolf had known this from the first moment she walked through my gate. He had known it and lain down at her door and refused to be moved, and I had stood in the dark looking at him and thought he was behaving embarrassingly, which tells you a great deal about the difference between a wolf's wisdom and a king's pride. I made the formal claim in the full assembly of the pack at the winter solstice, a year after Aldrich's wagon had brought her through my gate. I had asked her, the night before, whether she wanted ceremony or whether she wanted something quieter, because I understood by then that ceremony for its own sake was not something she valued. She had said, "Ceremony is not for me, it is for your pack, they need to see it." She was right, as she was usually right about the things that involved other people. So there was ceremony. Wren stood at my right hand. Aldrich, who was old enough to remember everything, stood behind him with an expression that I suspect he was glad his old rank did not require him to keep neutral. The pack filled the great hall, and the candles burned, and I spoke the old words, and Marin stood beside me in something that was still, characteristically, entirely practical. A deep green wool dress with good hems, a cloak she had chosen because it was warm, and received her place as Luna of Valdenmoor with the equanimity of someone who had spent 6 years on a border, and had long since stopped being surprised by how life arranged itself. Afterward, in the quiet, my wolf lay down at her feet and put his gray head on her boots and went to sleep in the middle of the celebration, and the pack laughed, and she looked down at him with the expression she had worn that first evening in the courtyard, and then she looked at me. The border is quiet now. That is perhaps not the grandest way to end a story about a fated bond and a brother returned, and a woman in a gray cloak who stood in a road and refused to be moved. But it is the truest thing. The Ashen Reach is settled. The rebuilt settlements have their mills, their healers' posts, their winter stores. Ren rides the border not as a weapon anymore but as something else, a king's brother, which is its own kind of authority, and he is learning slowly to use it as himself. And Marin's healer's post is never quite quiet, and there are always footsteps in the East Wing, and sometimes I find her in the evening explaining to Doran or one of the others how to do something that should have been taught to them years ago. And my wolf, who spent 2 years carrying the weight of 15 burned settlements and a grief I would not put down, comes to find her every evening and lies at her feet. He was very still for a very long time. She is the reason he stood up.